Good morning, everyone. My name is Erin Hutchins, and I'm the Inclusion and Diversity Coordinator for the Office of Alumni Affairs. On behalf of the entire Auburn Alumni Association, I'd like to welcome you to Black Alumni Week 2020. This is our sixth annual Black Alumni Week, or weekend, but we've changed it to a week due to the pandemic, and we are so excited to offer a lot of programming to you this week. And we're going to start off with a wonderful program today with our presenters. And before we get started, I'd like to introduce Mabon Beard. Mabon Beard has been Outreach Associate at the Caroline Marshall Drawn Center for the Arts and Humanities since 2008. She develops, implements, and manages statewide arts and humanities outreach programs and initiatives. In addition, she curates and interprets the historic 1847 Scott Yarborough House, known as Pebble Hill. Beard graduated from Emory University with her bachelor's degree in art history and a minor in anthropology. She currently serves as a membership secretary at the Alabama Historical Association and is a commissioner of the City of Auburn Historic Preservation Commission and member of the Alabama National Register Review Board. Thank you so much, Mabon, for being here, and take it away.
Thank you so much, Erin, for having us and including us in this wonderful week. We all wish that we could be together in person, but hopefully next year we'll be able to do something again. It's my great pleasure to introduce this program on the story of Major Harper and Betsy Scott and discussing Pebble Hill's African American legacy. We have with us today Dr. Terrance Vickerstaff. Unfortunately, Shari Williams could not be here with us today due to a death in the family, but we are thinking of her, and we do have a recording that I'm going to play of all of the research that she's done. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about her first. Shari Williams is a doctoral candidate in the Department of History at Auburn University. Her interest in the modern American South and public history began with her nonprofit volunteer work in public history and historic preservation in Macon County. This work afforded her the opportunity to establish and serve as the executive director of The Ridge, a local interpretive center focused on the history of the Federal Road through Macon County, multicultural migration, and rural community development. Her research interests include the past, present, and future of historic rural landscapes, traditions, and sites in Alabama's Black Belt, with a focus on the intersection of rural historic landscapes and social history through the lens of race, gender, and class. Her dissertation advisor, Dr. David Carter, is guiding her current study of rural domestic space as a leadership incubator for African American women who became grassroots civil rights activists and community developers. And she should be completing that dissertation soon, so hopefully next year she'll be able to present on that. Of course, we also have Dr. Terrance Vickerstaff with us. He's a native of Auburn, Alabama, a family historian, and a descendant of Major Harper and Betsy Scott, who you will soon learn about. He holds undergraduate and graduate degrees from Alabama A&M University. He holds a Master of Divinity from United Theological Seminary, a Doctor of Education from Nova Southeastern University, and is a graduate of the Certificate in Youth and Theology program at Princeton Theological Seminary. And he is currently completing a Doctor of Ministry from Louisville Presbyterian Theological Seminary. So thank you for being with us today, Dr. Vickerstaff.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be with you all.
So I'm going to begin by playing a recording of Shari's presentation about the research that she has done on Major Harper and Betsy Scott. And then we'll be able to hear from Dr. Vickerstaff and answer any questions that you have. So please use the Q&A box. We really want this to be interactive and hold a wonderful discussion.
This presentation will commemorate the enslaved people of Pebble Hill and other Scott properties, and it focuses on Major Harper and Betsy Scott, the patriarch and matriarch of the African American Harper family, and their journey from enslavement to freedom. We'll begin their story with a discussion of their marriage certificate and their ties to the families of half-brothers Judge John J. Harper Jr. and Nathaniel J. Scott. Judge Harper founded the town of Auburn, and Nathaniel J. Scott helped to build the town, having served as a town commissioner. Scott also served in the Alabama state legislature. The marriage certificate of Major Harper and Betsy Scott marks the time when this emancipated couple legally codified a sacred union that was actually sealed prior to 1865, but was not recognized by the laws of Alabama or the nation. Additionally, the certificate evokes the question, how did Major Harper and Betsy Scott meet? We can never be 100% certain about the circumstances that brought them together due to the lack of personal documents like diaries and letters that might provide the missing details. The best we can do is examine primary sources and information provided by the descendants of Major and Betsy Harper within the historical context of antebellum slavery. We reviewed primary sources and information from descendants and found that the kinship ties between the slaveholding families of Nathaniel J. Scott and Judge Harper likely made it possible for Major and Betsy to meet. Slavery tells us that Major and Betsy Harper desired to be free and to have full citizenship as Americans, as did other enslaved people. The story of their desire to be recognized as citizens begins with their marriage certificate. Here is displayed the hand-recorded Harper marriage license and certificate as a single document on a page. There are two parts to this record. The first part is probate judge A.B. Fannon's licensure of Major and Betsy to be wed. The second part is Justice of the Peace H.O. Moore's certification that he performed the wedding ceremony. The original license is found in a Macon County, Alabama probate court record book. And this is what you see on your screen is an image of that book. The Harper license appears on a page in the book with the licenses of 3 other African-American couples, and it is not a standalone recorded document. In the book, on the page immediately following, there are certificates of 3 other couples. So there are 7 certificates here altogether on these 2 pages. And of the 7, Major and Betsy and 3 other couples all were married on October 21st, 1865. The dates of marriage for the other couples include October 14th, October 15th, and October 22nd. So why did so many marriages take place at one time? The marriage is recorded on pages 259 and 260 of the image on your screen, and numerous others that took place for African-American couples in 1865 indicate beliefs held among free people and the government about marriage. Major and newly emancipated African-American couples viewed legal marriage as an act that conferred citizenship status and rights. So, as quickly as they could, Major and Betsy legalized their marriage. Legal marriage conferred legal household status to the Harper family and legal head of household status to Major. With the recognition of the Black household and the Black head of household came Major and Betsy's right to claim and protect their children and to own and distribute property. In 1865, the Harpers and other free couples eagerly sought to obtain this badge of citizenship that was denied to them for the hundreds of years that slavery operated legally in America. In keeping with the belief that stable family units form the foundation of a civilized American society, the United States government intervened in the matter of legalizing the unions of freed couples through the Freedmen's Bureau, an agency established before the Civil War ended, ostensibly to safeguard the well-being of formerly enslaved people in matters relating to the law, education, and working arrangements with whites. The Bureau's chief issued orders to state officials to facilitate solemnizing and recording marriages of emancipated couples that were united during slavery. And so Bureau officials in other states and Alabama encouraged couples to remarry. The story of Major Harper and Betsy Scott, and how they met, married, started a family during slavery is also connected to how the Harper and Scott slaveholding families migrated from Georgia to Alabama. The Harper and Scott slaveholding families both lived in Wilkes, Columbia, and Harris counties in Georgia. And the migration pathways of the two families within Georgia are very similar. And both families eventually migrated to Macon County, Alabama. Macon County was founded in 1832, and the map on your screen is dated 1836. So our arrow ends at Macon County. And at that time, Lee County was not formed, but eventually was formed in 1866 from portions of Macon and the surrounding counties. So based on available probate and will records, we know for certain that Major was enslaved by Judge Harper, but Betsy slaveholder is a little more difficult to trace. Her maiden surname, Scott, however, suggests that the slave owner also had the surname Scott and possibly was Nathaniel J. Scott. The last will and testament found to date that seems to be connected to Betsy is a will that's associated with the family of Nathaniel Scott's wife, Mary K. Embry. And the will suggests the possibility that the Embry family owned Betsy and or her ancestors. So on your screen, you see an image of the will of John Embry from Columbia County, Georgia, and it's dated June 1826. And item 5, which has a red which is highlighted with the red box, is the one that pertains to Mary. So John Embry's will stipulated that Mary was to inherit certain enslaved people from the estate. And I'll read the text to you. She was to inherit one Negro man named Sam, one boy named Levi, one Negro girl named Flora, one named Bess, and one Sylvia, and their 5 to her, meaning Mary, and her heirs, meaning Mary's heirs forever. The aforementioned Bess could be Betsy, or Betsy could be one of the 5 unnamed children who belonged to Bess and Sylvia. Naming patterns observed in Mary K. Embry's family lends credence to this speculation about the enslaved woman Bess. Slaveholders frequently named enslaved people after the relatives in the slaveholding family. Mary K. Embry's mother and maternal grandmother were both named Elizabeth. And if you look to the right of your screen, you'll see the arrow showing that naming pattern. The names Bess and Betsy are nicknames for Elizabeth. This information suggests that the enslaved girl Bess in John Embry's will could be the future Betsy Harper, who was born about 1812. Since Bess had children, and Betsy would have only been about 14 years of age in 1826, it's feasible that Bess was not Betsy, but Betsy's mother. If Bess was Betsy's mother, Bess would have extended the Elizabeth naming traditions by naming her own daughter, Betsy. We can speculate then that Major and Betsy met, united, and started a family during their enslavement due to the kinship ties between the slaveholding Embry, Scott, and Harper families that existed before, during, and after Nathaniel and Mary and Judge Harper all migrated to and settled in Auburn. Apparently, when Mary K. Embry and Nathaniel Scott married in Columbia County, Georgia, Mary brought the enslaved people she inherited into the marriage as jointly held property with Nathaniel. But if Betsy Harper came from the Embry family, why was her maiden surname Scott instead of Embry? An Alabama genealogist, Fraisine Taylor, who specializes in African American family history research, provides an answer. The division of slaves among the children or relatives may account for surnames different than that of an owner, especially if the slaves were willed to a female in the family that might not necessarily have the surname as the deceased. So if we apply this information to our speculations that we've discussed so far, then we know that it was likely that Bess did not inherit, did not take on the surname Embry because she became a part of the household of Nathaniel and Mary Scott. We can speculate again that Major and Betsy married, married, and started a family, looking at the migration patterns that we discussed so far, the naming traditions. And now we're going to move on and talk about Major Harper and his relationship to the documents. So this document on your screen is the first page of an 1849 Orphans Court record that recorded the distribution of the enslaved persons that belonged to the Judge John J. Harper Jr. estate. We can look at this record and see some really key information in terms of not only how many enslaved persons belong to Judge Harper, but going on the family information, the family's information provided by descendants, we know that the persons of interest that are listed in this record are Blacksmith Litt, Mose, Rose, Major, Carpenter Litt, and Nelson. The Harper family descendants have confirmed for us that Carpenter Litt was Major's father, Rose was Major's mother, Blacksmith Litt, Mose, and Nelson were Major's brothers. And the record shows us that naming patterns also existed in African-American families too. Major's brother Litt was their father's namesake, and Litt is the short version of the name Littleton. The division of enslaved persons resulted in separation of Major's family members. So as is shown in this first image, Francis Harper acquired Blacksmith Litt and Mose. On this next page, Wesley F. Harper, who was Judge Harper's son, obtained Rose and Major. William T. Davis, Judge Harper's son-in-law, obtained the elder Litt, Carpenter Litt. And P.O. Harper, another of Judge Harper's sons, an executor of the estate, obtained Nelson. So by looking at the movements of Francis and Wesley Harper, William T. Davis, and P.O. Harper, we can speculate further about the circumstances that made it possible for Major and Betsy to meet. If Major and Betsy were already united as a couple in 1849, then we can speculate about the circumstances that made it possible for them to be in close proximity to each other, remain a couple, and start a family. Sarah Francis, the widow of Judge Harper, and their son Wesley lived in Macon County through 1860. William T. Davis, Judge Harper's son-in-law, also lived in Macon County through 1860. We know through records that P.O. Harper, Judge Harper's other son, lived in Chambers County, Alabama through 1860. The 1850 and 1860 population and slave census records then tell us that Major's immediate family members, who could have included others that were on the list that we just saw, we're just not sure about those relationships, but most certainly Betsy and Major lived in close proximity to each other, despite the separation that this sale or these apportionments of the estate caused, because the people that they went to also lived in close proximity to each other. So with land records and information from the Harper family descendants, we know that the enslaved people that belonged to the Harpers and Scotts moved about somewhat freely between the properties that were owned by the Harpers and Scotts. And this condition certainly contributed to some stability of enslaved family units, including Major and Betsy's family. So overall, there were some fortuitous circumstances that kept this couple together and made it possible for them to exchange marriage vows legally in 1865 to signal their freedom. But antebellum slavery history informs us that Major and Betsy's family stability during enslavement is an exception. By law, enslaved people were chattel, meaning property, and they could be sold. They had economic value just like any other type of property, and they could be sold for a lot of different reasons, but one, to pay off debt of the slaveholder. So two primary sources make it clear that enslaved people were considered to be property. And the first is this advertisement from 1853. And it's actually an advertisement of an administrator's sale of two enslaved people, Cyrus and Sylvia, and they actually belonged to the estate of Alexander Scott, who was Nathaniel Scott's brother. So this ad appeared after Nathaniel and others who were executors of Alexander Scott's estate obtained permission to hold this sale to pay off the debt against Alexander's estate. One question that this raises is Sylvia in the advertisement the same Sylvia that Mary Kay Embry inherited after her father died? And the answer is probably not, because this Sylvia is too young to be the same person. And records don't tell us, unfortunately, why Cyrus and Sylvia were singled out to be sold. Another primary source that's striking in how it portrays enslaved people as property are the sections that you see on your screen from the 1850 and the 1860 slave census for Nathaniel J. Scott. And the 1850 and the 1860 both list these people only by their age, their gender, whether they were male or female, and the complexion. And for most of them, you'll see a B, and that stands for Black. So in 1850, Nathaniel Scott, the census enumerated a total of 38 individuals belonging to him, and in 1860, the number went up to 63. Well, in 1853, Nathaniel acquired 3 enslaved persons from the estate of his brother, Alexander. Their names were John, Elsie, and Mary. And so this, in part, explains the reason for the increase in the number of slaves that Scott owned from 1850 to 1860. One of the reasons for the difficulty in confirming that Betsy Scott was owned by Nathaniel J. Scott is the seeming non-existence of documents that describe the probation and settlement of his estate. In the antebellum era, as we have seen, estate probation and settlement documents, like the Orphans Court records for Judge Harper, typically provided a listing of enslaved people by their first name, gender, their value stated in dollars, and sometimes the identities of the persons who purchased or inherited them. Nathaniel Scott died in 1863. He wrote a will, and his widow Mary petitioned for a date to enter the will into probate, but the paper trail runs cold after that. Related primary sources reveal that the settlement of the estate of Nathaniel Scott was complicated by debt against the estate. This suggests that if Nathaniel owned Betsy, the estate's executors could have sold her away from Major and their 9 children that they had by this time. Conditions existed for the entire family to be sold, each to buyers who were not kin to the slaveholding Scott and Harper families, who did not live in close proximity to Macon County or adjacent counties. And indeed, countless numbers of enslaved families lost track of each other forever due to this permanent separation caused by slave sales to satisfy debt. But the Civil War was 2 years along in 1863 when Nathaniel Scott died, and perhaps contributed to delays in settling his estate, including selling off slaves to pay his debts. Nevertheless, When Mary Kay Scott finally sold Pebble Hill in 1870, she no longer had slave chattel to sell to raise money to pay debt. By that time, Major and Betsy were at least 5 years into their status as free people, and the threat of permanent separation to satisfy debt by selling them no longer existed. And on your screen, you can see the advertisement that appeared in the newspaper in 1870 for a mortgage sale of Pebble Hill by auction in Montgomery, Alabama. And the fact that it was being sold by auction also suggests that this was a stressful sort of situation for Mary selling this property. Between 1865 and 1870, there's another monumental event that occurred for Major Harper that also signaled his citizenship. In 1867, he, like countless other newly freed Black men, registered to vote for the very first time. What you see on your screen is the actual image, the image of the actual voter registration. And since the Major's name on the complete document is too small, there's an enlarged image, and you can faintly see Major Harper on line 448. Emancipated Black men obtained this right to register when Congress passed an act requiring all male citizens over the age of 21 years that were qualified to vote to be registered. Black men actually gained the constitutional right to vote in 1870 with the adoption of the 15th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Betsy, however, never obtained voting rights. Major and Betsy's female descendants and Betsy legally, well, Betsy never obtained it, but her descendants obtained the right to vote when the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was ratified in 1920. And of course, we know that the suppression of Black men's and women's voting rights occurred at least up until the passage of the Voting Rights Act in 1964 and 1965. So when legislators in 1870 adopted the 15th Amendment, a U.S. federal census enumerator for Lee County, Alabama, which was established by that time, counted Major and Betsy Scott along with their 3 children who were still living at home by name for the very first time. Their listing by name as a family on the 1870 census confirms that Major and Betsy Harper endured and survived the harsh and dehumanizing conditions of enslavement to obtain recognition of their freedom and status as American citizens in the eyes of the law, and they built a life and legacy for themselves, their children, and their descendants. This presentation shows through primary sources, kinship ties, migration patterns, Major and Betsy Harper's family history, the writings of historians about antebellum slavery, and family naming patterns that we can know and understand better the story of Major and Betsy Harper and their connections to Pebble Hill. On your screen, you'll see Major and Betsy and their 9 children and dates of birth and death as we currently know them. Their family legacy includes a continuation of naming traditions through generations, with the names Littleton, Major, Betsy, and nicknames for Betsy being quite popular. Major and Betsy's legacy is also represented by the fact that descendants still reside in Auburn today. Auburn family members and other members of this close-knit family celebrate their ties to Pebble Hill through collaborative projects with the Caroline Marshall Drawn Center for the Arts and Humanities, and through sharing discoveries made through their ongoing Scott Harper family research. Thank you.
All right, so thank you to Shari for all of the research that she did on that presentation this past spring. And I want to turn it over to Dr. Vickerstaff for a little bit, if you have any remarks to make about the research.
As a family, we are elated that Shari would come along and walk with us as we have been doing generations of research that started with oral histories that have been passed down for about 185 years. My family has been in the area since the winter of 1835, when the first Harper came over with Judge Harper to the dense Alabama wilderness to take a look at what would then become Macon County. And so from then until now, we have been sharing these oral histories, and being able to document more and more has been critical for us, not only in passing it from generation to generation, but to be able to share the story, not only of a family, but that of Auburn and Auburn University. And so it has been a wonderful experience to work with Shari and my buddies at Pebble Hill, because it was home. It was a community around Pebble Hill, not only during the antebellum time of slavery and Civil War, but after that, there was a development of a strong African-American community, and much of that community were from persons and families that were from this local enslaved families. And so a part of those were the family of Major and Betsy Harper. And so it has been a joy, and it has been a joy to be able to tie our connection to the Embry family, because we needed a little more push, and Shari gave us that explosive TNT that knocked down that genealogical roadblock, because a lot of times you do run into a roadblock when you're doing genealogy and family history work. And so she did some digging for us, and she was able to find Grandma Bess. Grandma Bess had been an oral story, and now we have been able to solidify Grandma Bess and being that of not of a Scott, but being that of an Embry, and being that of the traditional naming of enslaved persons as a part of chattel. So we're elated to be a part of the research. We are happy to solidify, and we're happy to be able to present to each of you on today, as we encourage you as a part of the Auburn family and as a part of Auburnites to do your own research and see how you are connected in whatever communities that you're originally from, be it African American, be it Indian American, being Anglo American, whatever your connection is. Find those connections to be able to pass those stories to the next generation. So I'm going to turn it back over to Mabin, so we'll see if we have any questions that need to be answered, or if the persons that are moderating have any questions.
Thank you. Don't see any questions yet, but if you have some, please put them in the Q&A box. Aaron, do you have any questions?
Yes. So for Terrance specifically, what was the first oral history story that you heard that you can remember? And just kind of how did you feel about what you heard, and how has that affected you today?
So the first oral history story that I heard, being a kid growing up in Auburn, Alabama, and so when you're from a very close-knit community, from a very close-knit family, you're always together, whether it's on a Thursday afternoon doing nothing, or a Sunday afternoon for family dinner. And so my grandmother, I grew up in the house with my grandmother. And so my grandmother was a storyteller. And so she inherited that from her mother, and as a part of telling stories. And so in our home, when it would storm or the weather was bad, she became the storyteller to kind of calm the house. And so when we began as a kid growing up, we would always pass these places. And during the storm stories, she would tell us about her Grandma Betsy, and she would tell us about her Papa Major and her Grandma Rose and her Papa Littleton and all of these persons. And as I listened to the stories, we would pass by structures in Auburn, and she would say, that's where they lived, and that's where the farm was, and that's where Grandma Betsy was a slave. And she would point at Pebble Hill on our way to visit some people that lived over on Thatch Avenue over near Baptist Hill. And so it became a series of stories and moments that continued to build. And then one day the genealogy bug bit me, and I wanted to know more. and I wanted to know more. And so she began to become my primary resource. And not only did I grow up with her, I grew up, when I was growing up, there were 4 generations of my family. I was the 4th. That was the youngest generation. So I had great aunts and great great aunts and great 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 aunts and uncles that were still living, and many of them born before the turn of the century. So these are folks that were born in the 1880s and 1890s. Some of them were 100 years old, and some of them were in their 90s, but they remembered a lot of things. And so as I sat and I soaked and I soaked in as much as they were saying, as much as they were telling, and I began to make sure that I documented it in my head when I realized I needed to write this stuff down. And so by the time I got to college, I began to write it down. It was already documented in family Bibles and different types of artifacts in the homes, but a documented chronology of history did not exist other than going to all of these different spaces to put it together. And so that's when I had to do a project in college, and I began to dig more. I was a freshman, and the teacher said, "You need to research your family." Hey, and I said, "Hey, that's easy, because I got my grandmother. I can get all of the information that I needed. So I know I'm making an A on this project." And it became not only an A for the project, it became a life-giving work, not only for me, but giving to my family and to the community, and being able to connect us to spaces, and being able to bring subsequent generations now to a space to help them understand who they are in reference to all that is around them, not just this current contemporary space, but all of those persons that come before you, to help them understand, as I was told, responsibility, accountability, and obligation, because you stand on someone else's shoulders for everything that you're able to do. So that's what happened. It bit me, and I'm still searching. I was on a family reunion virtual Zoom last night. And yeah, just because we're in COVID, it doesn't mean that we're going to stop having a family reunion. And so we meet every Sunday evening, and we had the larger family reunion as we would normally have. Sometimes we even visit Pebble Hill, but we meet on Sunday evenings just to continue to tell the story, because there's so many different aspects. And so now I've become the griot. I've become the West African griot of my family, and now I tell the story. And so that's how it bit me, Aaron.
Oh, I love that.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. We got a question from Jacoby Burns Johnson.
Okay.
Yes. Has there been any interaction between the families in current day and or across generations? What has that been like, and is there a relationship?
Okay, so we have been searching out for some of the descendants of Judge Harper, and I've been in contact with some, and we have not been able to find a descendant of the Scott Embreys. And we know they're out there, but I guess we just need to do a little bit more searching for them. But with my connection with some of the Harper descendants, it's been a wonderful experience to allow for conversation, to allow for an understanding of how two families are in connection with one another, whether we want to be or not, but we are, and how that connection now, what it looks like in this new millennia, but also to help understand the vast differences of what happened in the big house, if you will, versus what was going on in the slave quarter. What happened after slavery for one family and what happened after slavery for another family, and how those two families had coexisted. And as you even heard in the presentation, when I was talking with Harper descendant, white Harper descendant, we were talking about naming patterns. And for every Amanda they had, we have an Amanda. For every Littleton they had, we have a Littleton. And so being able to find the commonality, but also have the critical and real jeering conversations as it relates to where families are, and even the subsequent consequences that families have had because of an enslaved experience.
Wow, thank you for that. What's changed in the area when your grandmother was pointing out different areas and saying that's where we used to do this and that, outside of Pebble Hill, what are the locations that are drastically different today?
Auburn does not look like my little village anymore. She doesn't look like my little village. Auburn, the loveliest village of the plains. And if you've never read the poem, The Loveliest Village of the Plains, you need to find the poem and you need to read it. It was Judge Harper's daughter-in-law that helped name the town. And so it from our experience in being in this space for 185 years and listening to my elders and those that are in their 80s and 90s now, and even listening to my mother, my own experience with our town, it's changed a lot. It's changed a lot to come to Auburn and to come downtown and see the largest thing that used to be downtown Auburn. Exclusive, when I say Auburn, I'm not including Auburn University. Exclusive of Auburn University, and that of what at that time the tallest building was Sanford Hall or Haley Center. We don't include the stadium. Those were the two tallest buildings in Auburn. Now you come downtown, or the First Baptist Church down on the corner. Well, across from the First Baptist Church is a huge, this tall building that shadows the First Baptist Church. And so a lot of the landmarks have changed. A lot of downtown now are small boutiques and restaurants and bars and things to that nature. I would go downtown with my grandmother to the bank. And we would go downtown to a place called the Bootery, which was a shoe store. Or we would go downtown when she needed to buy flowers to a place called the Flowersmith. And it's these small changes that have happened. It's a wonderful thing to see the growth, but it's also a sad thing also to see your town change in so many different ways. And so it has changed drastically. Where a lot of one thing that has happened a lot, we have to be careful in our construction of the new and the destruction of what is historical or what is old, but really taking those spaces and transforming them so that they can be used, but the historical structures are still there. So now, when we come down Thatch, and all of Thatch was a Black community. From that of where you cross where the fire station is and you begin to go up what's called Baptist Hill, that was an entire African American community. And as you get to the end where the library is, that was an entire Black community. Now to go back, and I can name, because I visited these people growing up, and many of those houses are no longer there. I remember when the library was built, because before that was there, it was the old Lakeview Church, before the city of Auburn bought it and Lakeview moved. And so it's just these constant changes. There's a lot of student housing all over Auburn. So you see the growth, and you see your town change, and you're happy for the growth. But you do get a little sad because it doesn't look like where you went to school. Now, when I come back and I say that's where I went to high school, there's a whole new high school. It's good stuff. It's good stuff. But it's a constant change. But we have to be sure that we do keep some sense of what we resembled as the loveliest village of the plains.
I have a question kind of thinking about the future, because, you sort of got bitten by this bug, and I think you did a lot of the important work of collating all of this information and all of these oral histories that your family has. Is there someone now in your family from a younger generation that has also gotten bitten by the bug that will sort of be the inheritor of this wonderful tradition?
Yes. He's been bitten by the bug. He's one of my little cousins. And so Jaden is about 14 or 15. And you normally get bit by the bug when you're young. And so he's excited. And so what I have done and what we consider being a family historian, you're the custodian, you're the keeper of the history. And so I have begun to work with him and his grandmother. His grandmother is also working with him, because we've all been a part of this story. but I began to share the story. I began to bring him along as my apprentice so that he understands. And so when it's time to go to cemeteries, he's there. And when it's time to listen to the story, he's there. And when it's time to give a twist by way of technology, a video, or a 2020 millennial generation, I guess, what are they, Generation Y, twist on what's going on and how it affects him now in 2020. He's there and he's excited about it. So Jaden is the guy. Jaden is the guy. But we're always looking for others that want to hear the story, and not just hear the story, but as I said, be the custodian of the story. So he's the guy right now. So I'm very proud of him. We're extremely happy that he wants to walk along and hear and understand the story. And so what'll happen is all of the stuff that I have, he'll eventually get. But it's a joy to see another generation come along and to want to share the story. As my grandmother would say, we share the story lest we forget.
Absolutely. That's wonderful.
I've got a question on that. You said have all the stuff that you have. And so what are the artifacts outside of the family Bibles?
Oh, Aaron. Oh, wow. So as a true genealogist, a true family historian, and a true treasure hunter, if you will, you're looking for the stuff that is tied to your family. So when you become the family historian and people know that you're the keeper of the history, most of the times you don't have to look for stuff because they know who will care for it. And they will call you up, baby, I got something that you need to come take a look at. Or if I've been to your house, because again, I grew up with all of these wonderful seasoned members of my family, and they had good stuff in the house. While people are looking, they had the pictures, they had the Bibles, they had all kinds of stuff. And as I began to dive more into the whole family history thing, I would go by and visit. And so I always went by and visit, but it would be the one-on-one time with them. And so I would say I even gathered my own technology, because that was a generation that would not allow a photo to leave a house. Because if the photo left the house, it may not come back, or a document left the house, it may not come back. Well, I began to travel with my bag. My bag had a scanner in it, my laptop, my wand scanner when they came out. And, even with my iPad, I'm taking a picture of a picture. And so when they began to see those things, as they began to transition into eternity, they said, hey, you take this, you keep this for us. And so that's how I began to be the collector of family artifacts. And so within my possession, there's a Bible that dates 1872. And there's my papa's Bible that he carried to church every Sunday morning. And in it are the names listed. And the last inscription that went in it was that when my papa died, which is my great grandfather, and my great grandmother wrote his date in it. So after that, no more dates went in it. And she closed it and she put it up and she carried her own Bible. In my possession is a sewing machine that my grandma Emily used, which is my great grandmother. In my possession are photos from the 1870s and 1880s of family. I have photo albums. If you've ever seen some photo albums with the big black photo albums with the black paper inside, and they glued or stuck the photo in the little slots, I have those. There are quilts that are in my possession. There's a quilting top so Major's son-in-law, Major's son, Pony, married a woman named Hester, and those are my great grandparents. And so there's a quilting top that my grandma Hester began before she died, and it's made of pieces of her parents' clothes. And so it stays in a humidified area so that it doesn't dry out. So it's those types of things. And so it's pieces of furniture. It's all types of stuff that I have. So it becomes In my office, it's a wonderful experience. My nieces and nephews like to go in, and because there are lots of things to explore. There are lots of things to explore, and that's the best part of being the keeper of the stuff. So, Aaron, I got boxes. I have suitcases of stuff that they've given me that I've tried to catalog. I'm still cataloging. So when I say stuff, it's lots of stuff. But again, it's the stuff that's important, that was important to them, that somebody keep, and somebody be able to pass on to the next generation. And so that's the stuff that I have. And I tell anyone this: be careful when you're cleaning out your parents' or your grandparents' homes, because what you look carefully through everything, because in it are some treasures that once they're gone, you'll never get them back. One of the things that everyone knows about Cracker Barrel, a lot of people have been to Cracker Barrel, but when I go in Cracker Barrel, I cringe, because on the walls in Cracker Barrel are photos of families and individuals. And somebody is looking for it. And there's nothing against the people at Cracker Barrel. They're getting this stuff in probably lots of antique sales. But somebody's looking for that photo. That photo got away from somebody. And every time I look up and I see a face there, it's like, okay, where's your family? Who's looking for you? And because I know that experience, because there are photos that we're trying to track down, and because we know that there was a photo that existed, and what happened to it, we don't know. And so it's making sure you keep those family treasures in your family as long as you can, making sure that other people have copies. I'm not the only person. I'm the custodian, but I make sure other people have copies of the copies, and so that they can enjoy the faces and as it goes along with the story that they're now telling their children and their grandchildren.
We had a couple of questions that came in, but is there any interest with the university wanting to put the things you described on display? And I know you've been working with Mabin and Mark at Pebble Hill. Has that been an opportunity, and do we plan on doing that in the future?
So as it relates to the items, I would have to ask the larger family to put them on display, because they are in my possession, but they don't belong to me. They belong to the family. I just care for them. As it relates to items that have been on display, the most important thing that has been on display has been the copy of Major and Betsy's marriage certificate, because it ties them to the space. It ties them to the community around that of Pebble Hill. So that has been the most important thing that has been on display. There was an event that was held that we did interpretation, that we allowed some family members to come in interpretive dress and to portray family members. There was a person that portrayed Betsy, another that portrayed her daughter-in-law, Hester. And so allowing those persons to come alive. So as it relates to those things, we're in conversation as to how to utilize all of the information, not just from my family, but from other families as well, as it relates to the African-American history in Auburn, Alabama, prior to emancipation. And so there'll probably be some things coming up, and we're doing a lot of work as it relates to that. So stay tuned, stay tuned, stay tuned, stay tuned.
I got another question. Are there any family traditions you all have been able to trace back to Pebble Hill?
Well, I'm not going to say we're able to trace them back to Pebble Hill, but we can trace them back to prior to emancipation. And so again, the naming traditions. And so at every generation, there is someone that carries part of the previous generation, or at least two generations, the names. And so there are naming patterns, again, of Littleton, Scott, and that of a huge naming pattern of utilizing the name of Harper, The other part of the other traditions have been that of when a person is getting ready to transition into eternity, calling the youngest child, the youngest baby into the room in order to bless that youngest baby. And that is not just a family tradition, but it's a biblical tradition as well. And so allowing that person to lay hands on that kid and to speak over that child's life. And so that has been a very powerful thing. The other traditions have been some recipes that have been passed from their antebellum recipes, and we keep them just like that. We don't add anything to it because my grandmother said this is way my grandmama Emily did it, and this is the way I'm going to do it. And so I even find myself when I'm cooking or other person's cooking a particular dish, it has to do with it's a dish made of black-eyed peas. And so it's a combination of different peas and different meats and different herbs and types of greens in a mixture. And so allowing that to be done just as she did it. And so it's just the little things. It's the little things. There have been other traditions that have formed since then, the gathering we've gathered for as a family, the last weekend in June for over 100 years. And so that has been the pinnacle of our year each summer, because it allows us to see one another. And so we just kind of continue to do what we've done. But we also are encouraged, and I encourage all of our family members to ensure that you start new traditions, because traditions are those things that you find important, you find value. There's some type of lesson that is there. And so allowing those to be started as well. So we have some old and we have some new, but not particularly tied to the space.
I got another question. So somebody probably got a little hungry when they were talking about those recipes here. So they want to know if you've ever thought about writing a book of those precious recipes.
So one of my cousins is collecting the recipes. So I'm not going to steal her thunder. And so I will. So when she does get it done, I will definitely make sure that the folks that are connected to this space are getting those recipes so you can try them out. And I will say this, some of those recipes are because of the migration from Virginia to the Carolinas to Georgia to Alabama. A lot of those recipes still have some of the West African basics as a part of those recipes. And so it's trying to keep those as pure as possible with a twist here or there, but giving homage and paying honor to those who brought them with them. So once we get that done, we'll make sure that is spread among the people. And hey, we may even have a tasting fair, Maven. We have to have a tasting fair. And look at Aaron's face.
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, and we did. And see, another thing, one of the traditions that, as we talk about traditions, food is a wonderful gathering space. And so as a part of our doing more research and extending it to family and extending it to community, as we do work around Major and Betsy, as we do work around Baptist Hill Cemetery, we always find a way to gather the people, but we find a way to gather the people around food. And we ask them to cook or bake something that is traditional in their family. And you would be elated to see all of the mouth-watering dishes that arrive. And they arrive as I remember them arriving on a Sunday afternoon at my grandmother's home, or Sunday morning at church when we were eating dinner after church. All of the covered dishes and the Pyrex dishes, as my grandmother would call them, the glass dishes, and they're coming and they have wonderful smells coming out, and you're following behind that person, and she's saying, oh, nope, you can't have any yet. You know, that type of thing. Can I just have a slice of pie? Nope, you can't have that yet. And so and so we've done those at at Pebble Hill. And so, hey, the next time that we do one and that's open to the public, sometimes we do them as closed parts of the community because so those families can have fellowship. But when we do one that's open, hey, we'll invite all of those persons in this space to come and fellowship, eat, and learn more about the African American community as it relates to Auburn proper, and even as it relates to the building of the East Alabama Masonic Institute, the Alabama Polytechnic Institute, as she would be called, and now that of Auburn University. Because these enslaved persons also helped in making sure the land was cleared, and then thereafter emancipation, it would be them that would be doing many of the domestic jobs at API, and so that connection there. So hey, so next time we eat, next time we are gathered, we have to make sure you guys are there.
Absolutely.
I got one more question.
All right.
So what are some future events and programs that you and Mabin and Mark will be doing at Pebble Hill and that we could probably enjoy that would be for the public, or any more projects that you all have in as it relates to your family or other history that surrounds Auburn and its Black citizens?
Right. So a couple of projects that we've been throwing around. We have been doing some continuous work with the Baptist Hill Cemetery, which is located right down the road from Pebble Hill, and it's situated on a beautiful corner right across from the public library. And in that cemetery, there are only 2 public Black cemeteries that have been a part of the Auburn community. That's that of Baptist Hill and that of Westview. And so we've been doing some restoration and preservation work there. We've been in coordination and collaboration with Dr. Robert Bubb, who I think is going to show up this afternoon in the program. We've been working directly with him and with 2 things: to preserve those stories and to restore those grave sites, but also to bring on a new generation of Auburnites. If you didn't know that's what we're called from Auburn, that's who we are. We're Auburnites that are in middle school and high school, to allow that space to be a restorative classroom for them to understand the lives of these persons. What does that mean for you today? And what are the lessons that each of these students take away from that personality? And so what it does is it allows generations of persons in space together. So it allows descendants from these families, my family and others, and it allows these kids that many of them may have not grown, their families are not originally from Auburn, Alabama, if you will. When I say originally, I'm talking about those that came over in the winter of 1835, 36, and 37. And so those persons being able to work in concert. And so that's one of the projects. And so I also know that we're doing some Rosenwald work. And there is another project that we have been talking about in doing another family history fair. So we have been talking about some of those. And I'm going to turn it over to Mabin because she probably has more stuff that I don't even know that. She probably has stuff that I don't even know I'm going to be doing. So that's the best part of this.
Well, it's always a joy to work with Terrance. One thing that we're doing at Pebble Hill is we are open to the public as part of the university, but not necessarily we're not really a historic house museum, but we also want to take people through and really talk about the stories of this house, because I think the history of Pebble Hill and the people who live there, you can really tell the story of Auburn through them. And so we're working on some self-guided tours, but also some sort of installations in the house about Major Harper and Betsy Scott, and especially that's sort of one wonderful primary source we have of their marriage certificate. I think is really special to sort of have on display in the house. And of course, whatever the family wants to do, we are always open to working with them.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So I think we're going to turn it over to Mark Wilson so he can close this out today. Go ahead, Mark.
Thanks, Aaron. Appreciate everybody. We are always delighted to hear from Terrance Vickerstaff. It's so ironic. There's no better advocate for the study of local history and for Auburn's history than Terrance Vickerstaff, and he doesn't even live in Auburn right now. And so one day we hope to get him from North Alabama, even though they can borrow him for a while, but we want him back in town. All of this research is really important because whenever you see an antebellum home like Pebble Hill, oftentimes you often get just one story of one family who built the house. What we try to do through the house, through the hallway, through a portrait collection of Creek Indians, including one who is on the deed of land that was transferred, is to be able to tell all of the stories that are related to the local history, because it's through all of those stories that we can have the kind of understanding of the past that we need for the future. And so for all of you who are attending this program right now, we have a gift. Maven worked with a fabricator to create a lapel pin of Pebble Hill. And so we have one of these for everyone who is attending, and Maven and Aaron will work to see if anyone would like one of these. We'll be glad to mail those to you. You have our invitation for you when you are in town to come and visit Pebble Hill, hopefully for the first time, and hopefully it won't be the last time. We would love to stay in touch with you and to find out how we can host you and work with you in the future. We also have another project, and this bookmark will come along with the lapel pin, because we're working with a local teacher, a fourth grade teacher. Fourth graders take Alabama history for lessons related to Pebble Hill. We call the project Teaching Pebble Hill. A couple of the lessons are directly related to the research that you've heard about this morning. That marriage certificate, the story of enslavement, the story of resilience beyond enslavement is one that must be told and that must be understood by all of us. And so we want local students to understand the complexity of the history around them and the resources that are available here. The university acquired this house in 1985 as the home for the Center for the Arts and Humanities. We're an outreach office. We see ourselves as a crossroads between the public and the university. And there's been no greater partnership than with Dr. Vickerstaff and family members as we seek to discover more of that history. And I think you are probably inspired to learn more of your own family history as a result of this program. And we want to be on that journey with you as well. So thanks to everyone, Maven, Aaron, and Terrance for delivering this wonderful program, and Shari in her absence. A wonderful future by the end of this semester will be Dr. Shari Williams, who will be doing more research into the lives of persons in the state of Alabama. And so we appreciate all of that expertise and look forward to future opportunities.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mark. And thank you everybody for attending today. This has been so enlightening, and I've learned so much about Auburn, more than I knew when I was a student. And I really appreciate each and every one of you today for sharing your story, especially you, Terrance, for bringing this history to us. So this afternoon, guys, 3 p.m. Central Standard Time, Robert Bubb, Jada Ashford, and Alexis Jones will be sharing a presentation on the research to preserve African-American stories and traditions. So some particular stories that they'll be sharing are Robert Frazier, who was the first mascot of Auburn, and James Eccles, who made lemonade at Toomer's Drugs. And so I hope you join us this afternoon. Thank you so much again for joining us, and War Eagle.
War Eagle.